Why does Keir Starmer keep sending spy flights towards Gaza now that there is a ceasefire? And what's even more curious is that Declassified has found that these British spy flights are only going on the days when Hamas is releasing people from captivity. Joining me to discuss this is my colleague Mark Curtis, who's been investigating the story with me. Great to have you with us, Mark.
Hi Phil, thanks for having me again.
So just to recap then, because this story has been running for many months now, it was back in December 2023 that Britain's then Conservative Defence Secretary, Grant Shapps, announced that the Royal Air Force would start conducting surveillance flights over Gaza, supposedly to help locate hostages. Now, whether that was the real reason is the subject of very valid debate, but we thought once the ceasefire started again last month that the flights would stop. Hamas had after all agreed to release people it held in captivity, so there'd be no need for surveillance flights to keep looking for them. But what we found through our investigations at Declassified is that actually on the days when we can all see on TV just by turning on Al Jazeera where the hostages are in Gaza because they're being released and handed to the Red Cross, those are the very same days when the Royal Air Force decides to send spy flights. This has happened 6 times now. So what's really going on? Mark, what do you make of this?
Well, it is a little bit suspicious. As you say, the only days on which the spy flights have been operating in the last couple of weeks have been on the days that Hamas is releasing hostages. So the previous rationale that the MOD is given for these spy flights, that they are intended to locate hostages, now seems a bit redundant when Hamas is actually releasing them. So I mean, we're speculating, we're concerned that this appears to be another aspect of how the UK is essentially working with Israeli intelligence to spy on one of the actors in this conflict, but not both of them. And so, we are questioning whether the UK is in fact spying on Hamas at this time that it is releasing hostages. I think this raises concerns that, first of all, is the UK providing intelligence back to Israel on wider Hamas movements that then Israel could use in military operations in Gaza? And the concern there is that Israel is not really distinguishing between Hamas and civilian targets in Gaza and hasn't been throughout the genocide. The other concern that we have is whether this amounts to a breach of the ceasefire agreement, at least in the spirit of the ceasefire agreement, which says that aviation operations should cease over Gaza for about 12 hours a day on the days that Hamas is releasing the hostages. So for the UK to continue those spy flights at that time, it's probably not a technical breach of the ceasefire, but it kind of points to it being a potential breach of the spirit of the ceasefire. And the reason why there was a clause in the ceasefire agreement about restricting aviation movement during the ceasefire or during the days on which the hostages were released was to provide assurances that Israel wasn't going to use location data to resume its war in Gaza. And I would remind people that organizations like Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, have been calling for months for the UK to end its military assistance to Israel at a time that it has been conducting this genocide. So there's a lot of stuff going on behind the scenes that we don't know about. And I think the British public could do with some explanations as to what really is going on. What is the true extent of Britain's military support to Israel?
Absolutely. And something that's extraordinary about this is that we're the only outlet covering this story. Even though anyone can go on a flight tracking website and see these flights taking off and landing from Cyprus, the British base in the Eastern Mediterranean. So I think, again, this shows the importance of the work that we do at Declassified. If people haven't already subscribed to this channel, please hit the subscribe button below. It helps the video reach a wider audience. And you can donate to our work from £3 a month or through the Super Thanks button below. And sometimes when we're the only people covering something, I worry, have we got the wrong end of the stick here? But I've actually spoken to someone who knows a lot more about the military than I do. And this isn't in the article, but they told me that, on these days when the flights are going and Hamas are releasing people from captivity, Hamas are openly parading in Gaza. So the flights will be able to see both the numbers of Hamas fighting strength, the types of weapons they're using, the locations, possibly even identify individuals. And they suggested strongly to me that that's actually the real purpose for why these flights are going. It's to make a kind of battlefield assessment of the strength of Hamas, its formations, and that information could obviously be useful for Israel, which I think, if that's coming from a military expert, that is something that everyone should be worried about, that the UK is doing something here that is again very much against what the ceasefire is supposed to be about. Now, Mark, we've been covering this issue for a very long time, but you might remember the first hostage that was released was this British-Israeli national, Emily Damari. And I sort of thought, well, maybe once she'd been released, she was the only remaining British national in captivity, then there'd be no reason whatsoever for the flights. The latest piece that I've done with you, I mean, it's now, it was five hostages released, wasn't it? And then since the article came out on the weekend, there was another hostage release. I mean, were you surprised just to see the flight still going from Cyprus at the weekend?
Yeah, I mean, as you say, I think we've both been a bit surprised about that. There is a real need for transparency here. And you mentioned the media coverage. I mean, that has actually been quite shocking, I think. That why is it only us that's covering this story? Because, as you say, it's easy to find out this information. A small subscription to an aviation monitoring website will show you all the flights that the Royal Air Force takes around the world, including these spy flights from RAF Akrotiri in Cyprus. And so it would be very easy for any journalist to spot these flights and to raise questions of ministers, officials about these flights that would build up more of a public information around this issue and would put more pressure on ministers to disclose more about what these operations are actually about. But there's been no interest on the part of the media. I did a study for Declassified that we published a couple of weeks ago about the BBC's coverage of the surveillance flights. I found one article in the whole of 2024 even mentioning these flights. And this is just one aspect, isn't it, of Britain's support for Israel that has been basically covered up by the British media. There's the issue of military training taking place in the UK of Israeli armed forces personnel. The government have refused to provide details on that. And we know through our colleagues' work, John McAvoy, who found that something like 50 tons of ammunition has been shipped through UK airspace to Israel with no protest or anything other than acquiescence from the UK authorities. So there's a lot of stuff going on, and it seems sometimes that we're the only people documenting this, which is not a very good state of affairs for the state of public information in this country. But I think says a lot about the role that the mainstream media plays in keeping the public in the dark.
Indeed. I should say as well, we went to Ministry of Defence press office for both of these articles about the ceasefire spy flights to ask them what was going on. And as they've done throughout the conflict, they refused to comment on supposedly operational details. But they did say that the flights never entered what they call Gazan airspace. But the military expert I spoke to said, well, that doesn't really matter because they can obviously fly in Israel very close to Gaza, and from that altitude, Gaza's so small, they can look down, they can still get electromagnetic and video surveillance of what's happening. So that was quite interesting to hear that actually, even if they're just skirting around the edge of Gazan airspace, it's effectively the same. They're able to do very much the same things. One place where our work is having a real impact is in Cyprus, where 3% of the island was kept by Britain after supposed independence in 1960. And the airbase at Akrotiri, where these flights are going from, has become a target of protests there by groups like the Cyprus Peace Council, ACL, the main opposition left-wing party, and there's a new group there, I think it's called Social Alliance, who have been campaigning against these surveillance flights. We spoke to a Cypriot actress, Melanie Steliou, who's involved with Social Alliance, and she was raising many of these same questions that we've discussed. Why are these flights still going even when there's a ceasefire? So it does look like this is, there's mounting concern in the British political class about things like the Chagos Islands, having to hand over sovereignty of these military bases, or whether we really legally have sovereignty in the first place. So the issue of complicity in the genocide in Gaza is something that could put the British bases in Cyprus under a lot of pressure there domestically, for a change in the status quo. So it'd be interesting to see where that goes over the next few months. Mark, our article is on our website, and John McAvoy's article is up there as well. Thanks for joining me today to discuss this work. And this video series about our articles is being really successful. Lots of people have been subscribing. So if you're not one of those already, please hit the button below and stay tuned for our next video. Thanks for watching.